folk cultures and this is actually a series of the activities to demonstrate to the general public about the beauties and charms of the intangible assets and heritage. So today we are going to visit one important demonstrations of the Bashu culture, the Sichuan culture, which is the shoe embroideries. So here I'm actually visiting one of these intangible heritage school, which is named the Embroidery Workshop. And this building is also built in the classical Chinese style. The school is located at the heart of Chengdu, which is named International Embroidery Schools in Sichuan. Today we are going to visit the 3 inhabitants of the intangible heritage, and there are 8 different trainings and also classes being provided in the schools, including cultural and creation, handcraft, marketing trainings, the rehabilitations and craftsmanships and handicraft trainings, among other different trainings, to better let our viewers understand the shoe embroideries and its current status quo and its future developments. We have the experts from this workshop, Madam Zhou Wan, here today with us. So dear viewers, hi, I'm going to bring you to the shoe embroidery workshop to have a glimpse of this exquisite embroidery. There are 4 different classes of the embroideries: shoe embroidery, xiang embroidery, yue embroidery, and also the xiu embroidery, among which the shoe embroidery tops. As proven by the ancient poems, for the shoe embroidery has the longest history among the 4. So this is actually our researching center. Today we also have with us the 2 inhabitants of this intangible heritage to be with us, and the 2 important teachers and professors are going to give us a hand-on experience about this embroidery. I heard about your stories in another interview, and I heard that you and Madam Xiao is actually the brothers and your sister. So why do you choose this shoe embroidery as your profession? Because there are so many embroiderers who are women. For the most of the embroiderers, there are rarely few men working on the embroidery. So it's also a part of the shoe embroidery where we allow the men to participate in the work. For most of the embroidery craftsmanship, only women are allowed to enter into this embroidery room. When we were young, we were being immersed in the atmosphere of embroidery. And we also want to play with other kids. Later on, I gradually fall in love with the shoe embroidery. with the re-emerging trend of the shoe embroidery, our family is also focusing on our professions on this shoe embroidery. So you are telling us the shoe embroidery is quite different with other different classes of the embroidery because most of the embroiderers are male. What's the reason behind it? At the very beginning, you have to do the embroidery craftsmanship on top of the silk, and the silk is very expensive, so we cannot afford a single mistake in the process of the embroidery. That's the reason why, at the very beginning, most of the silk is given to the male embroiderers. Because for the embroidery, of shoe embroidery, it also have different craftsmanships, including the double-faced embroidery and one-faced embroidery. For the double-faced embroidery, it's also an important part of the shoe embroidery. So can you give us more introduction about that? Can you give us a demonstration of this craftsmanship? We are using these special needles. So I think most of the needles for most of the silk that we are using, the length is actually shorter than a
现在是在尝试把不同的材质用作这个蜀绣的创作，是吧？
We are trying to mix different materials and blend them into this exquisite embroidery.
这个一针的一线线，大概如果说一个白丁从来没有接触过蜀绣的，然后他要学习多久才能绣出来一些比较简单的像样的，就是您看比较像样的这个？像我们现在我们的同学，他们能够做一期20个小时。
How long it will take a layman to be cultivated and trained as mature as you? I think after 20 hours training, a layman basically can embroider some of the flowers, butterflies, and these kind of traditional patterns. But if they want to enter into the second phase, they need to take at least several years practice to do the double-faced embroidery. I used to see some of the patterns as pandas and crops. So how do we show the fluffy surface of the panda? So for the fluffy skins of the animals, we are using this cross embroidery technique, just as I'm demonstrating you here. So I have been working in the Chengdu Shoe Embroidery Research Institute for over 3 decades. And in my early years, I learned this embroidery from my father. Later on, the research institution has transformed itself from a state-owned institution to a private and commercially operated institution. That was when I started my career of professional embroiderers. When you were learning at your early years, so how did you learn from your 师傅? So at the time, we are actually on a one-to-one group where my master and mentor teach me hand to hand. It takes at least 80 hours to learn these embroidery techniques. About these traditional patterns. Can we have a look on other different patterns of this shoe embroidery?
萧氏蜀绣记历，这是写您这个家族的这个的书啊，哦哟，已经出书了。这些都是老照片，是。
This is our textbook, which were passed on through our family. These are the photos where my fathers and ancestors that have done. For the embroidery, you can see the exquisite details about this person. Can we look at a few of your works in your institute? There are so many different photos, which were also listed here. That was back in the United 80s. My father, my sister, and me. This is my father. A photo of him doing the embroidery. There is also a huge shoe embroidery here.
这个是牦牛毛吗？哦，您先说这幅图，因为这幅图看起来很大，它比人都要高。这个图，这幅图叫什么？是
Can you give us a little bit introductions of this embroidery? This is actually an embroidery indicating the longevities of the human life. This red-crowned crane actually takes me 5 months to finish it. And in the Chinese culture, red-crowned crane is celebrating the longevity of human life. I actually prepared 3 drafts for this whole painting. And this is actually for the demonstration in our institution. If we zoom in, we could see the feathers of this creature. The feathers is actually changed with the shadows of the color. Do we need to embroider different layers upon the layers? Because I see the color gradually exchanged. There are dark ones and also the shallow ones. Later on, can you give us more demonstration about different embroideries, or you can teach me about how do I do the embroidery? This is actually using the hair and the tails of the yak to be embroidered in linens. In the Tibetan region, they are producing this yarn, but they don't have the techniques of doing the embroidery. That's the reason why they actually sought the hair of the young's hair of around 20 to 30 different RMBs. So that's the reason why we are using this young's hair to embroider in our shoe embroideries, because we want to encourage the local farmers and herdsmen to produce a much more value-added product, and we have involved this embroidery into the part of the local poverty alleviation project. So currently we have developed this cultural project, and we are actually recruiting all of the local students from the Tibetan region to let them to learn from this embroidery craftsmanship. And of course, we are sending teachers to teach the local Tibetan people about how to do the shoe embroidery using the hairs and tails of the young. Can you give us a little bit introduction about the difference between the young's hair and tail among other different animals? So for the yaks, they have strong hair. So once you actually pick these pieces of the embroidery up, you will feel the weight and volumes of that. This is actually a double-faced embroidery, with different colors and patterns being shown at different sizes, different faces. Of course, we have the black-haired yak and also the yellow-haired yak. So can you give us a brief introduction about the price differences between the traditional silk and also the newly used yang's hair? I think the yang's hair is cheaper because we are collecting them from the local herdsmen and have them to shift their previous poverty status to the richer life. These pillows are also a series of the products we have developed for the local residents. There is a mix of the silk and yang's hair for these pillows. It will feel more cubic, since we are actually embroidered these patterns on top of that. This is actually hand embroidered, and for the red part is hand embroidered, while the green part is machine embroidered. So can you give us a brief introduction about the difference between the handcrafted embroidery and machine-made embroidery? For the past 3,000 years, the shoe embroidery enjoyed a quite renowned name in the Chinese history. But in the modern world, can you tell us the difference between the machine-made embroidery and also the handmade embroidery? So for the machine-made embroidery, the silk and the lines are different. But for the human-used lines, we are using the silk lines. For the machine embroideries, for every minute, they can actually embroider for 800 times, while human hands takes only 80 times. That is why we see that the handmade embroidery is actually enjoyed a higher value. Let's check a few works that you have done for this handmade embroidery. So here, let me give our viewers more background information. The Shu embroidery has a splendid history dating back to the Qing Dynasty, with a rapid growing reputation, and in the Qing government, it also has its industrial associations with all kinds of the Shu embroidery workshops being scattered all across the country. And the professional embroiderers of Shu embroidery is one important profession. But with the rising of the machine embroideries, the handcrafted embroidery lost its previous glories. In the year 2006, as the embroiderers working at the Shu embroidery, the number of them dwindles. The Shu embroidery was listed as the first benches of the Intangible Heritage. In the year 2006, the Chengdu Shu Embroidery Institution has changed its form from the state-owned institution to the privately funded institution. For our traditional embroiderers, we really want to protect this technique. So for this craftsmanship, can you give us more introductions? I think it's double-faced Shu embroidery. But in Chengdu, they actually win the second award of the Shuxiu Creativity Award. We actually embroidered the small flowers and leaves first. Later on, we have made the big flowers and blossoms. And we are using the human hairs and also the yak's hair to do this embroidery. Under the light, these shadows has widely changed patterns. So for these different demonstrations, what kind of techniques are we demonstrating here? What's the reason? Why do we show this pattern? We think this is actually a sum up of all of our freshmen's work. When they are doing the basic Int'l 101 class about the Shu artery, they are not using the silk lines. They were using the cotton lines and human hairs. So this is actually embroiderer's work of Dunhuang models, and this is our second copy of the murals that we have done so far. We copied the murals in Dunhuang in a ratio of 1:1 to do this embroidery work. If you look at the details of this work, you will find the patterns is exquisite. And the first piece of this work is being exhibited in the Forbidden City Museum, representing the enriching charm of the Shu embroidery. So can you give us more introductions about this work? This is actually a demonstration of the Holy Mother and Jesus himself. When we were creating these paintings, we want to use the exquisite embroideries to show the relations between the light and shadow. I used to do my bachelorship in the Chinese Anatomy of Art. And at the time, I learned the shape of shadows and lights from the Western way of drawings. That's the reason why I was combining the Western way of drawing together with the craftsmanship of the shoe embroideries. You will see the contrast between the light and shadows. So how did you overcome this contrast of the light and shadows and darkness? Let's look at the different rocks and the sleeping ladies here. From the top ones to the lower ones, you will see a gradual change of these colors. There are 128 different types of the embroideries, way of doing the embroidery in the shoe embroidery class. Do you use most of them quite often? Or how do you use these 128 different craftsmanships? Actually, we planned the whole picture first, and then we decided which part is more suited for a certain kind of the embroidery. So can we understand that if you learn about this 128 different way of doing the embroideries, and in the creations of one piece of artwork, if you want to achieve a result such as the contrast of the light shadow, you will do some of the new craftsmanships and doing the new attacks. So here, we are also seeing a series of the new traditional Chinese cultural patterns. All of them are the embroideries. For our school, we have this clothes making machine. For each one of the ladies here, they are doing different part of the work. So currently, our institutions is actually a vivid demonstration of this photo exactly. We actually added more modernized equipment. I read a lot about researchers' work and papers about the embroideries, which noted that for the intangible heritage protection in China, we have protected the very inhabitants of this art craftsmanship, while we also want to protect the traditional craftsmanships and give it more enriching content. We are a embroidery institutions who is actually gaining the support from the Sichuan provincial government. There are 40 different Chinese projects which get the national foundation for the intangible heritage. So for Mr. Xiao, among all of you students, how many of them is willing to learn, to devote their whole life to the embroidery profession? I think the young people, they are born after the 1990s. They actually love this embroidery work. Some of them, even if after their graduation, they are willing to stay in our institution. Do we look at a piece of the double-faced embroidery, right? So how do we achieve this marvelous work? When I was doing this embroidery, I actually used the I used the patterns at the other side to hide some part of the mistakes that I made in the other face. Sometimes the lines that I used are thinner and more fragile than a human hair. I think that when we are trying to embroider the eyes on top of the human figure, we actually enliven the person, and that's the most important part of our embroidery. Currently, the handmade embroidery is very expensive and of great value. Thank you very much, Mr. Xiao, for showing us so many different artworks, because we have another intangible heritage inhabitants waiting for us. So we are about to visit another master who is capable of doing the human handmade carpet. So we are trying to protect and innovate the human handmade carpet. Let's go and visit our master there. The whole institution is built up according to the traditional architect style. I think that our school, in our first day of building up this architect, we are thinking to create an environment of the traditional Chinese culture. We believe a good environment can help the student to learn, to feel the traditional Chinese culture, and to get inspired by the whole environment. So we think that we are trying to breed our student from the external environment. This is our silk carpet project, and now our master is waiting for us. So please say hello to our viewers. So hello everybody. Thank you very much for your attention to our school. I'm Chengdu from Shuaning. I used to work at a carpet making factories. Now I'm a professor at this institution. Here we want to show you the craftsmanship about ourselves, about this intangible heritage. And we believe that tradition and a new wave of innovation is going to flourishing once again. This is a new piece of work, which is also very environmental friendly. This is the deposited clothes strings where we have washed. We make it into the pillows that we can use to our day-to-day life. I can see that from the external looks. This is actually a re-innovation of the traditional murals, and we applied for the national patents. Currently, we don't have the machines in the market. This is the traditional way of doing the carpet. Madam Chen, could you give us more introduction about that? This machine, the rack itself, is being built and designed by myself. And I believe that we are using the traditional way of doing the carpet. So what kind of lines do you use? The white ones is actually the golden lines, and it's also made of silk. But compared with the mostly used lines, it has a strong fiber and more attachment to each other. So you mean that this is a very quite strong silk, right? Yes, it's going to be quite strong once it's being woven into each other. And this is actually serving at the basis for these patterns. Although these patterns are symmetry to each other, but of course they have some of these circles and turns and curves on top of these patterns. How did we get this pattern? Let's look at about how did we do the work. They actually make several different marks about the curves and different colors. And they have a photo prepared as a comparison. Let's look at it from another side. The rack itself can change according to the demand of the whole frame. According to the orders of the size of the carpet, we are going to use different size of the rack to do the work. For the smaller one, we are using the smaller rack to do the work. This is going to save us more energy. So let me sum it up that the human handmade carpet is actually a quite tradition in the Chinese culture, but we are trying to build up a series of the new patterns. If you want to build up these patterns, you will do your work according to these two drawings, which is under a strict 1-to-1 ratios here. During the handmade processing, the craftsman will follow strictly about this pattern, one line after another. I find that the handmade carpet is very different from my previous understandings about the carpet making procedure. I used to think that it's just like woven sweater, but I believe that currently it's very different. There are so many different colors of the silk lines that you have to woven into the pattern. So for the 2 to 3 centimeters, you have to woven and exchange the colors to one another. So finally, the carpet would be very thick. We think the thickness can reach to 1 centimeter because it's being woven by the silk hands, so it's quite soft and smooth surface will make it an exquisite artwork. this is the most traditional way of doing the handmade carpet. So why did you learn that in your, when you were younger? Around 10 years ago, I was doing this in my village. And later on, I think that it's a part of the traditional Chinese culture. I love this way of doing things. I love making the carpet. I love silk. That's the reason why I threw myself in this profession. And I become more mature with that. In the year 1978, I began to learn from that. So for this doll here, it's not like the traditional Chinese dolls. So I think this is actually a carpet that we are exporting to the Peruvian country. We are selling it into the Middle East countries. So why do we make this silk carpet? We call it the lady with a flower pattern. So this artwork is being inspired from a paper cutting work, showing us a bride who's going to marry, and that's the reason why we have make this as a carpet and trying to export it to the Middle East. So for the shoe embroideries, they have so many different overseas orders according to their own orders and their own requirement. We have made this special pattern. In the 1980s and 1970s, we have a lot of order from the Middle East. That's the reason why most of our patterns is being woven with a flavor from the Middle East. For the size of this carpet, it takes 1 year, 1 month, and 1 month to finish the whole procedure. Do you have many students? Are them young? They are learning from you day to day. And how many of them is also choosing this carpet making as one of their profession? Not so many of them want to make this carpet making as one of their profession. But for most of our graduates, they can make a small pandas or some of the small animals to the other different friends as a gift. I'd like to see most of the students is young people. Some of them are still learning in the training institutions. But for most of them, they did not choose the handmade carpet as one of their profession, but they can learn from you with another. They are learning from this training school with these techniques as a second job to provide them with more incomes. As far as I know, this handmade carpet making procedure is distinguishing in the Chengdu region. How many of the masters like you are doing this work? To my knowledge, I'm actually the only one who have thrown myself in the professions of the handmaking carpet. That's the reason my school really thinks the handmade carpet is an important major in our school, and they have put up a lot of investment to support the students who want to major in the handmade carpet. I think the rack is also easy to carry. Once they graduated, they can move this rack and open up their own company. I love my students. I think they are quick learners. Currently, we are not only inhabiting the traditional techniques as a training technique. From the teachers and learners' perspective, we want to combine ourselves with the modern technologies, providing some of the craftsmanships and express them in a clever method. Can you give us more introduction about this machine? It is the hollow-made net that we can make up the patterns on top of that. This is the silk weaving with the longest traditions. Using the modern machines, we can produce a carpet in a few seconds. But from the feelings of one touch, I feel that the machine-made carpet is lacking the temperature and also the feelings of the art, but it has greatly increased the efficiency. We have technologies at our right hand with the traditions at our left hand. So all of the students and teachers enjoy an idyllic lifestyle in our school. We really want to balance the nature and everybody's lives. For most of the plants and vegetations, it was left here when we were buying this piece of land, these fruit trees. And for 1 year, these fruit trees, in the spring, the fruit will blossom, while in autumn, the fruit is hanging on the branches. So we have one student association protecting the fruit trees being picked up by all the pedestrians. The architect itself is boasted with the Christmas of the ancient and traditional Chinese culture. So for our school, we are also a 3-8 sport in China. This is another workshop for the student to learn from the handmade craft. We learn these technologies and we bought the machine from New Zealand. That is the reason why from a certain perspective, it's the way of doing things is a little bit easier for us compared with the traditional way of doing the embroideries and hand-making carpet. I think this rack is easier because compared with the last one, all of these can be machine moved because we have more measures and size in this machine.
学生在用，他们在做这些编织的，是在做练习吗？哎，你好，同学，你是在做什么？在做练习吗？对，我们还在学习，啊。然后，那就问问他们现在学生学到
So
的
can you
这
give us
些
an introduction? I'm actually
是新西
practicing
兰的
my
这些
techniques.
编织的技术。哦。
So what they are
那这
learning
个新西兰
here
的这个编织技术和我们这个传统的这种
is actually the New Zealand's way of doing the embroideries and the techniques of wovens. Can you give us more introductions about the difference between the New Zealand's way of doing the wovens and also
讲一下嘛，看一下这个编织技术跟那个
the knittings?
它这个花纹感觉是更啊，对，它叫平纹。其实我们传统也有平纹，对吧？
The pattern we feel is more like the horizontal patterns. In our traditional Chinese way of quilting, we also have this horizontal waves. What's the difference between this one and that one? I think this pattern is being done according to the patterns in the computer.
它是什么？它是机绣吗？它是蜀绣？嗯，蜀绣。
This demonstration, this bending, is it being made from the machine or is it the shoe embroidery? I think it's shoe embroidery.
看不太清楚。这个也很好看，这个是放，就是这是一个老的物件吗？
So here we also have carpet. So is this shoe embroidery a traditional embroidery? Can you give us more introduction about its background information?
就是刚才在上面的时候，我们那个蜀绣传承人肖老师讲过的。
I think the traditional Chinese shoe embroidery celebrating harmony and happiness in people's day-to-day life. This is machine-made shoe embroidery.
它是人工绣和这个机绣的结合，然后这个
With a lower cost and clearer patterns. The panels we see is a combination between the machine-made embroidery and the human-made embroidery. Can we have a close look on that?
细绣的。哎，但是我其实说句实在话，我用我自己的这个触感，我觉得这个线好像是硬一些，比在楼上的那个。
With my naked eye and my feelings about the touch, I feel that the machine-made embroidery has a harder touch while the human-made embroidery has a softer touch. It is because the machine has more power when they are putting the thread into the coils, so that's reason why it has a harder surface, while the human-made embroidery has a smoother surface.
因为我自己是觉得啊，小吴老师给个镜头，就是我自己是觉得在楼上的那些就是手绣，它的那个颜色过渡更加的柔和。 但是机绣感觉是它有非常就是明确的
I think the
颜色的对比。
handmade, human-made embroidery has a gradual shift of color, while the machine-made embroidery has a contrast of the color between the red ones and also the green ones. It's more distinct between the different colors. I would say that this is the trend of the industry to have more contrast of the color. With the ever developing of the machine-made embroidery, I will see that The human-made embroidery is distinguishing. Let me show you more artwork about this embroidery. Actually, the cultural heritage is a part of our Chinese people's DNA. That's the reason why in these so many years relations of the intangible cultural assets, we want to reinterpret these intangible assets. In this year's Intangible Heritage Festival, we want to give more interpretations and explanations of these assets. I think this is something quite good. If we are only stick to the traditions, it might be far away from the young people today, and we cannot find the common ground between the traditions and the young people. This is actually an exhibition hall for our students. This is actually a student's handmade wedding dress. We actually require our students to design the new patterns to put something new to this wedding dress with more patterns of the embroideries and handmade knit work being emerged and mixed and blended into this wedding dress. It will give the bride a new feelings. Because according to my current research, there are so many different techniques, all kinds of the embroideries, the way of doing the weavings being used into the designs of the modern fashion. This is one of our students' work. The student actually started her own company to combine the different patterns of the embroideries. She used to learn from the shoe embroidery techniques, and using it, she actually embroidered these beautiful mountains. And later on, she's using the batik skill to wax printing these patterns. So this is actually a machine-made embroidery carpet. It will give you these feelings that you are working right among these spring blossoms. The professional shoe embroidery factories and institutions may no longer exist, but for the new masters, they still stick to the traditional racks, the silk carpet, and they are using one single different molds and needles to show you the charms and the Christmas of the shoe embroideries. I believe with the expanding of the market and growing of the knowledge of the general public, the shoe embroidery will reinvent its blossom once again.